Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Welcome to Qualitative Wednesdays. Today, it will be a good one, I think. It's going to be one live and a Qualitative Wednesday where we'll be covering a topic that is of interest to many, if not all, qualitative researchers. Even though it's about developing a semi structured interview guide, a lot of the things that we'll be discussing here today can be applied to other methods of data collection. For instance, if you're developing a guide for a focus group as well, I think you can transfer and think about many of the things that we will be discussing today for your work. So just so I can tell that to someone. My kids were just crazy just 5 minutes ago, both crying, fighting, and one kicked the other right in the face before I started. So, just so you know that even though it might seem like everything is really calm and quiet, and my background might seem put together, things were crazy before we started. So I needed to share that just because I had to do some deep breathing and some tapping meditation before I started. I actually just pressed live because things felt crazy. Anyway, with that aside and kind of getting back to where we are, I first of all, I want to say that thank you to all of you, the ones, especially I would say the people that reach out, that I have as clients that work with me and with QualiQ, because without you, I wouldn't have the ideas that I have for blog posts and for discussions here. So I'm very thankful for those of you that reach out, that ask questions, that are really open to sharing the things that are going on in your projects, because that's how I learn what I need to cover and discuss here to better support you in your qualitative research and in your qualitative work and journey. And developing a semi structured interview guide was something that came up as I was discussing someone's project, one of the students that I am working with. And she asked me if I had any resources about developing an interview guide. And I referred her to a book that I like very much. It's called Interviews, and I have the link, and you can find more information in the blog post. But I knew that it wasn't really what she was looking for, because she needed more direction in what to ask and how to start and what to cover in an interview guide. And I shared with her things that were more from my experience, but then later on I found an article, and the article is also in the blog post, that really aligned with what I had shared with her from my experience. So the things that I read in this article and that I covered in the blog post, they are very much in line with the book that I also recommend, which is Interviews by Cavell and Brinkman. I don't know if I am pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize if that is butchering the author's names. In any case, we really start with a discussion about interviews being the most suitable for data collection, so as a method of data collection. And that's a whole other discussion about when interviews should be considered or might be the best or align with the method or the methodology that you're using the best. But in general, we talk about interviews as being more intimate, being more appropriate when you're covering potentially sensitive topics or values, ideals. Some health conditions are also looked at as interviews being more appropriate to explore patient perceptions and experiences. And in addition to that, if it's a topic that the patient, or if I said patient, but that's not necessarily who might be, If the person is not as familiar with the topic, interviews might also be a better approach because you will be unfolding the thoughts and supporting your participant in really unfolding their own thinking process about a certain topic during an interview. And those are all things that they have covered in the article. The other thing that they said about developing an interview guide is how important it is for us to have an idea of what is already in the literature, what has been covered. And I think this is important because I really emphasize be careful not to let your interview guide become a house or a kitchen renovation where you have a specific idea, a specific topic, and then all of a sudden, especially in discussing with a team, a research team, or supervisors or students, everyone is like, oh, since we are asking this, shouldn't we also ask this? Since we are asking this question, shouldn't we also be exploring this other area that is related and it's also important? And that's the thing. There is a limit, and you have to put a limit. The limit is important because if it becomes too broad or too extensive in terms of number of questions, it won't go in depth. And I think that's where I say that you need to allow space for going into a deep exploration of the areas, of the themes that you're covering in your interview guide. I might have said this here. I am now mixing my sources because I'm also creating the course for the fall that I will be launching. But there is a really good quote by Sue Monkied that says that the more in depth we go into someone's experience, the more generalizable it becomes. So the more we explore the details in an interview, the more likely we are to touch other experiences from other people with similar situations, contexts, conditions. So it's important for you to keep in mind that more questions are not necessarily better for your study. And one thing that will help you narrow your questions is knowing what is already in the literature. If there are areas related to what you're investigating that have been widely reported, widely covered, take a step further. Investigate the things that were mentioned as potentially explaining or things that were maybe in the discussion of key papers in your area that you really feel you can make that step forward, advance science and the literature in your area in a direction that hasn't been explored yet. So that's a way and one strategy for you to know and be savvy about what you cover and what to let go, and really realize that you cannot do too many questions or cover too many aspects without losing something. The other thing that is discussed in the paper and that I also discuss, it's really more related to building an interview guide that has open-ended questions, that allows for reciprocity, for listening, and for learning from your participants. The authors mention starting questions as much as possible with what, how, when, who, or with who, and avoiding close-ended questions as much as possible. This is something that I have discussed in other blog posts, and the link to those actually I think it's one blog post, and the link to that blog post is in yesterday's blog post. In addition to that, the 7 reflections for better responses, one of the free resources I have on the website, is really a helpful one for you to consider how you're approaching your interview guide, especially in how you're building and wording the questions and trying to really make them friendly and building that trust and that rapport with your participants. One thing that I found very interesting in how they described is that, and that's something that I shared with a student, was for her to choose key theme areas and build questions around those, but then have a list of probes or kind of like sub questions that might be used or not used depending on where the conversation go with each participant. And it sounds natural, and I find that you definitely need to be ready to start an interview with questions that get your toes wet, you get your feet wet, and get your participant also feeling more comfortable with you before you get into the questions that might be requiring deeper thinking or introspection, or that might be also more sensitive in terms of the emotional aspect or load of certain questions. Keep that in mind. There is a really good quote, and I can post in our group because I have that quote. I think it was published in all social media, PolyQ social media last year, and it's by Chief Delorme and Cadmus Delorme. He is from a First Nation community in Saskatchewan, Canada, and he was giving a speech, and he said, and I quote, it's not word for word because I can't remember by memory, but it goes along the lines, show me your heart before you ask me to hold your hand. And I think that's something to keep in mind for interviews. Show your participants that you care, that you're here, or that you have the purpose to really support them, learn with them, that you care about their experience, about their perceptions, about their condition, if it's a health related condition, before you ask them to hold your hand and trust you with things that have made them uncomfortable or that will cause them to feel deeper emotional feelings, and that will maybe trigger memories that might be harder for them. So before you get to those questions, really build questions and build opportunities for you as the interviewer to show them you care. And that's important, and that's something for you to keep in mind. Now, another aspect is pilot testing. If you have an opportunity for a pilot test, I highly encourage you to do so. It's better if it doesn't necessarily need to be with participants, or if you can have like lookalike participants, great. It's better if it's not with people who are too primed to give you certain answers or know your study inside out and will kind of be too perfect as in terms of what they will be giving you as answers, and how easy it might be to feel like your interview guide is checking all the boxes and exactly how you want. So if it's more of like as real as possible, that's what you're looking for pilot testing an interview guide. If pilot testing the interview guide is not an option, if it's not feasible, if it is not something that you have enough time before your first interview is happening, the thing that I would recommend and that I really emphasize with the students that I have worked in the past is to keep in mind that it is not a detriment to rigor if you're changing the questions after you started your first few interviews. To me, and from my perspective and my positionality in terms of the paradigm and what I believe qualitative research is and how it should be done, in my perception, I actually see that as a strength. You are being responsive to what you're seeing and hearing from your participants as the interviews start and you feel that you might need to stop asking certain questions or ask them in another way or in another order. That type of flexibility is really, to me, a sign that you're growing and becoming a better qualitative researcher. So keep that in mind and really be proud of yourself. If after a few interviews you're like, this is not working well, I need to adjust the order of my questions and how I'm asking them, and maybe drop some that are not working well, and refine your interview guide to a place where you feel comfortable with it, that it's giving you opportunities to ask purposeful questions, listen to your participants, follow up with them, show them you care, and really learn from them and with them. And last but not least, you get to the point where you have a final interview guide and you go with it. It doesn't mean that along the way you're not going to be reflecting, or you shouldn't be reflecting on how things are going. I think that's the other thing that I highly recommend. If you're building reflexivity and verification strategies along the way, and you're doing concurrent data collection and analysis, you might again come back to your interview guide and place more emphasis or spend more time in certain questions that you feel that you haven't explored as much in depth with your first few participants, and you can really focus more time in certain areas after a certain number of interviews. And I think it tends to happen like the first few questions you tend to spend more time with them. So it's almost a natural progression that as you're moving with the interviews, those questions that are asked last, if you're going faster and you're feeling like that certain areas that are explored in those questions need to be explored and discussed more in depth, maybe consider moving them to second or third question if they are really appropriate for an earlier stage in your interview. So those are all the things that I had to share with you today. As I told you, I wouldn't be able to, I am creative. I take pride in saying that. I'm very creative, but I wouldn't be able to produce content for the QualiQ blog without the ideas that I get from you, from people who reach out, from the students that I work with, from the projects that I support. So if you have any questions, and if you feel that any of the things that you read in this paper, read in the blog, could be discussed more in depth, let me know. I'd be happy to cover them. And for those of you that are entering QualiQ for Qualitative Minds more recently, or have entered in the past few weeks, I'm getting a lot of ideas and requests for more phenomenology. There is a lot of the work requests about discourse analysis and semiotics as well. So lots of topics that, in all sincerity, I haven't explored in depth and I haven't read much in depth. So I am getting ready and also looking for people that can give us good content and support us in learning about certain topic areas that I don't feel I might be the strongest instructor, but I'm trying to get there and trying to get what you need. So hang in there, and as we move through the summer and fall, all those things that you were entering the group and as you're answering the questions, I am really keeping a log of all the topics that you want and you need, and we'll be covering them as we go for sure. So have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you here next week. And if you have any questions, or if you want to share how you have built your interview guides, how you have worked in making them better as you're going through interviews, share your ideas with us and help other people in the group learn as well. So have a great week, and I'll see you here next week.